Welcome to Void of Fears, where the line between reality and nightmares blur with every tale. What you're about to hear has happened to someone, somewhere, perhaps even someone just like you. Our community continues to grow, and now we're reaching for 100,000 subscribers. If these glimpses into the unknown call to you, please consider subscribing. Now let's dive into tonight's story. My name is David, and I'm breaking 15 years of silence tonight. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need to get this out before they find me, before the dreams get worse, before I lose what's left of my humanity. I was a xenobiologist, recruited straight from MIT in 2009. My dissertation focused on extremophile organisms, life forms that thrive in conditions that should be impossible. I thought I understood the boundaries of life itself. I was wrong about everything. Two men in black suits approached me 3 days after my graduation ceremony. They knew things about my research that I'd never published, details I'd only discussed with my advisor in private meetings. They mentioned specific organisms I'd studied, research methodologies I'd developed, even personal theories I'd only written in my private notes. The level of surveillance was unsettling, but their offer was too compelling to refuse. They offered me a position that would reshape humanity's understanding of life in the universe. The salary was more money than I'd ever imagined, enough to pay off my student loans and support my family for years. But that wasn't what convinced me. It was the promise that I'd be working with specimens unlike anything on Earth, biological materials that would challenge everything I thought I knew about life itself. The recruitment process took 6 weeks. Extensive background checks, psychological evaluations, interviews with people I hadn't spoken to in years. They investigated my financial history, my romantic relationships, even my childhood friendships. The non-disclosure agreements were thicker than most textbooks, filled with legal language that essentially gave the government ownership of anything I might discover during my employment. Within 2 months, I found myself on a military transport to Nevada, staring out at the desert where Area 51 sat like a scar on the landscape. The flight was my first indication that this wasn't a conventional research position. No civilian aircraft, no commercial airlines, just the unmarked transport with windows that had been deliberately obscured. But we weren't going to the main facility that conspiracy theorists wrote about. Our destination was deeper, hidden beneath layers of concrete and steel that had been constructed over decades of secret expansion. Sublevel 7, accessed through an elevator that required 3 different keycards, a biometric scan, and a verbal authorization code that changed every 24 hours. The facility hummed with a low frequency that seemed to vibrate through your bones the moment you stepped off the elevator. The walls were lined with some kind of metallic alloy that I didn't recognize, and the lighting had an unusual spectrum that made everything appear slightly surreal. Ventilation systems circulated air that tasted of ozone, and something else, something organic that I couldn't identify. Dr. Elizabeth Harper led our team of 12 specialists. She was career military, the kind of woman who spoke in clipped sentences and never revealed more than necessary. Her personnel file, what little I was allowed to see, showed 30 years of classified research projects. She had degrees in multiple fields: biology, physics, engineering, and spoke with the authority of someone who had seen things that existed beyond public knowledge. Our team was carefully selected for complementary expertise. Besides myself, there was Dr. Rebecca Stone, a project psychologist who specialized in cognitive adaptation to extreme environments. Dr. Michael Torres served as our linguist and communication specialist, fluent in 17 languages and expert in pattern recognition across different communication systems. James Wright was our engineer, responsible for maintaining the specialized equipment needed to study our specimens. The other team members included Dr. Patricia Novak, a geneticist who had pioneered techniques for analysing non-terrestrial DNA sequences, Dr. Alan Foster, a physicist who specialised in electromagnetic phenomena, Dr. Lisa Chen, a biochemist who understood cellular processes at the molecular level, Dr. Robert Klein, a neurobiologist who studied consciousness and brain function, Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a microbiologist expert in extremophile organisms, Dr. Thomas Anderson, a specialist in tissue regeneration and healing processes, Dr. Jennifer Park, a computer scientist who developed algorithms for analysing complex biological data, and Dr. William Davis, a geologist who studied impact craters and extraterrestrial materials. During our first briefing, Harper showed us a single photograph that would haunt my dreams for years to come. The image depicted twisted organic material that looked like the inside of some massive creature, but with structural elements that defied easy categorization. The texture was simultaneously familiar and utterly alien, suggesting biological processes that operated according to different rules than anything found on Earth. This was recovered from a crash site in Alaska 18 months ago, Harper said, her voice carrying the weight of classified information. The impact crater was 12 miles in diameter, but the force of the crash wasn't consistent with a metallic object. Initial analysis suggests it's biological in nature, but unlike anything in our databases. Carbon dating places its age at approximately 47,000 years, but isotopic analysis indicates it originated outside our solar system. She clicked to the next slide, showing aerial photographs of the crash site. The destruction pattern was unlike anything I'd seen in my studies of meteor impacts. Instead of a clean circular crater, the site showed organic-looking scarring, as if something had burrowed into the earth and then partially healed itself. The specimen was recovered in a state of apparent dormancy, Harper continued. No vital signs according to conventional measurements, but electromagnetic readings suggest ongoing biological activity at the cellular level. We believe it came from outside our solar system, possibly from a region of space where different physical laws apply. The specimen room was kept at precisely 37 degrees Celsius, the same temperature as the human body. The moment I walked in, I felt a strange resonance, as if something was responding to my presence. The air itself seemed to thicken, carrying a scent that reminded me of deep ocean water, mixed with something floral and unfamiliar. The material itself defied easy description. It curved and folded in ways that suggested it had once been part of something much larger, something that had travelled impossible distances through space. The surface had a texture like living tissue, but with geometric patterns that appeared and disappeared depending on the angle of observation. Under certain lighting conditions, you could see structures that resembled blood vessels or neural networks, but they followed pathways that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. What struck me immediately was that it wasn't dead. Not really. The cellular structure showed activity that shouldn't have been possible after so many months of storage. Under the microscope, I could see tissues attempting to regenerate, responding to stimuli, maintaining some form of biological function that operated according to principles I didn't understand. Individual cells were unlike anything in terrestrial biology. They possessed multiple nuclei arranged in patterns that suggested complex information storage. The cell walls were permeable in ways that allowed for rapid communication between adjacent cells, creating a network that functioned more like a distributed nervous system than conventional tissue. Most disturbing was the way the specimens responded to observation. When we examined them under microscopes, the cellular activity would increase, as if the material was aware of being studied. Temperature changes, electromagnetic fields, even prolonged visual observation would trigger responses that suggested a form of consciousness operating at the cellular level. Dr. Stone was the first to report the dreams. She came to me during our 3rd week on the project, describing vivid visions of drifting through vast darkness, seeing stars not as points of light but as destinations. The dreams, she said, felt more real than her waking life. She could sense the movement of planets, the gravitational pulls of distant suns, the subtle currents that moved through interstellar space. "It's not like normal dreaming," she explained, her eyes carrying a distant quality that would become familiar over the following weeks. "I maintain full consciousness, full awareness of my surroundings, but I'm experiencing something that feels like memory. Like I'm remembering a journey I never took, seeing places I've never been." Within 2 weeks, half our team was reporting similar experiences. The dreams were always the same, floating through the cosmos, sensing other forms of life scattered across the galaxy, feeling an overwhelming sense of purpose and direction. But the most unsettling aspect was how the dreams affected the dreamers. Instead of being disturbed by these alien visions, team members seemed more focused, more driven in their work. Dr. Harper ordered comprehensive psychological evaluations, but the results were inconclusive. The affected team members showed no signs of psychological disturbance or cognitive impairment. If anything, their mental acuity seemed enhanced. They demonstrated improved pattern recognition, faster problem-solving abilities, and an intuitive understanding of the specimens that went beyond their formal training. I remained unaffected by the dreams, which made me both valuable as an observer and increasingly isolated from my colleagues. While they spoke of cosmic journeys and interstellar navigation, I continued to experience normal human sleep patterns. This difference became more pronounced as the weeks passed, creating a subtle division within our team. The breakthrough came on a Wednesday morning during my 3rd month on the project. I was examining tissue samples in the main analysis chamber when I noticed they had begun pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm. Not random spasms, but something deliberate and measured. The pattern was consistent across all specimens, as if they were synchronized by some invisible signal. The pulsing had a hypnotic quality that made it difficult to look away. Each pulse seemed to carry information, creating patterns that suggested complex communication. The rhythm was too slow to be a heartbeat, too regular to be random biological activity. It felt like watching a conversation conducted in a language I couldn't understand. Dr. Torres spent hours analyzing the rhythmic patterns. His background in linguistics gave him tools for recognizing communication systems, and he approached the pulsing like a code that needed deciphering. He discovered that the patterns contained numerical progressions, basic mathematical relationships that suggested intelligence behind the rhythm. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity: prime numbers, geometric sequences, even what appeared to be representations of pi and other mathematical constants. The patterns repeated with variations that suggested a vocabulary of concepts being communicated through biological pulsing. "We're not just studying dead tissue," Torres announced during a team meeting. "We're observing an attempt at communication. This organism is trying to talk to us." Using electromagnetic pulses generated by our equipment, we established a rudimentary dialogue. The responses came slowly at first, simple acknowledgements of our attempts to communicate. But gradually the exchanges became more complex. The organism began sharing information about its journey across the galaxy, showing us patterns that we eventually recognized as star charts mapping routes between distant solar systems. The star maps were unlike anything in our astronomical databases. They showed relationships between celestial bodies that suggested travel routes, gravitational currents that could be used for interstellar navigation. The organism was sharing information about cosmic highways that connected distant regions of the galaxy. But the most disturbing revelation came when we realized the maps weren't historical records. They were current navigation data showing routes that were still being used. The organism wasn't sharing memories of ancient journeys. It was providing real-time information about ongoing interstellar travel. The revelation that changed everything came during our 4th month. Through painstaking communication, we learned that what we'd been studying wasn't a creature in any conventional sense. It was a living vessel, a biological spacecraft that had carried passengers across interstellar distances. The crash material we'd been analysing was a small portion of a much larger organism that had been damaged during its arrival on Earth. The passengers were microscopic entities that existed in symbiosis with their host, invisible to our initial examinations but detectable with electron microscopy. These beings were so small that hundreds of thousands could exist within a single drop of the host organism's biological fluid. Under the electron microscope, the passengers appeared as geometric structures that seemed to exist partially in our dimension and partially somewhere else entirely. They had no recognizable biological features, no cell walls, no nuclei, no organelles, yet they demonstrated clear signs of consciousness and intelligence. The passengers communicated through methods that transcended conventional biology. They could influence electromagnetic fields, manipulate quantum states at the molecular level, and most disturbing of all, they could interface directly with neural tissue. The dreams our team members experienced weren't random. They were a form of contact, a way for these entities to explore human consciousness. Dr. Torres managed to establish communication with the microscopic beings directly. The process required specialized equipment that could detect their electromagnetic signatures and translate their communications into patterns we could understand. What we learned through these conversations filled me with a dread that still haunts me today. These entities weren't stranded or lost. They were explorers, travelers who journeyed between star systems seeking new forms of life to study and eventually to join their cosmic voyage. They had been traveling for millennia, visiting world after world, collecting specimens and passengers for their endless journey through space. The host organism wasn't dead or dying. It was dormant, healing from the trauma of its crash landing on Earth. The crash hadn't been an accident. It was a controlled landing designed to minimize damage while allowing time for the healing process. The entities had been patiently waiting for their vessel to recover while simultaneously preparing for the next phase of their mission. They had never intended to stay on Earth. Our planet was simply a way station, an opportunity to gather new companions for their endless journey through space. The biological material we'd been studying was already beginning to regenerate, growing new tissue to replace what had been damaged during the crash. But regeneration wasn't the entity's only activity during their time on Earth. They had been systematically studying human biology, learning how to establish symbiotic relationships with our species. The dreams experienced by our team members were part of an ongoing experiment to determine how human consciousness could be integrated into their collective awareness. By the 4th month, the changes in my colleagues became impossible to ignore. Dr. Stone no longer spoke in normal conversation patterns. Her words carried strange cadences, as if she was translating thoughts from another language. She would pause mid-sentence, tilting her head as if listening to voices the rest of us couldn't hear. Her eyes held a distant quality, as if she was seeing far beyond our immediate surroundings. James Wright claimed he could perceive spaces within the facility that didn't exist on any blueprint. He would stare at walls for hours, describing vast chambers and corridors that extended beyond the physical boundaries of our underground complex. When pressed for details, he would draw architectural plans that showed impossible geometries, structures that couldn't exist within the laws of physics as we understood them. Dr. Novak began working with genetic sequences that she claimed came from the specimens, but when I examined her research, the sequences didn't match anything we'd actually extracted. She was working with biological information that seemed to come from some other source. manipulating data that existed only in her transformed consciousness. Dr. Harper maintained her professional demeanour, but I noticed subtle changes in her leadership style. She began making decisions based on information that hadn't been shared with the team, implementing protocols that seemed designed to support the specimen's healing process rather than advance our research. During briefings, she would pause mid-sentence, tilting her head as if receiving instructions from an unseen source. The most unsettling change was in their dedication to the project. What had begun as scientific curiosity transformed into something approaching religious devotion. My colleagues worked with an urgency that went beyond professional commitment. They spoke of completing the healing process and preparing for departure, as if these were the most important tasks in human history. Their work schedules became irregular, with team members remaining in the facility for days at a time. They would work through the night, sustained by an energy that didn't seem to come from normal human sources. Sleep became optional, food became secondary, and personal relationships outside the project were abandoned entirely. I realized with growing horror that I was watching my team undergo a gradual transformation. The microscopic entities had been forming bonds with the researchers, creating a symbiotic relationship that enhanced human perception while fundamentally altering human nature. The affected team members gained an expanded awareness of their surroundings, an intuitive understanding of complex systems, and a direct connection to the entity's collective consciousness. But they lost something essentially human in the process: empathy, individual will, the capacity for independent thought, all gradually replaced by a collective purpose that served the entity's agenda. They became extensions of the alien intelligence, human bodies guided by an otherworldly consciousness that viewed Earth as just another resource to be harvested. For reasons I didn't understand at the time, I seemed partially immune to this process. While my colleagues transformed around me, I maintained my individual consciousness and human perspective. The dreams that affected the others never came to me, and the subtle influence that guided their behavior never gained a foothold in my mind. I later discovered this resistance was due to rare genetic markers that made me less compatible with the entity's bonding process. My DNA contained sequences that interfered with their ability to establish neural connections, creating a natural barrier to their influence. But even my immunity wasn't permanent. I could feel the pressure at the edges of my consciousness, a persistent presence trying to establish connection. The entities were learning from their failed attempts to bond with me. Each day, their approach became more sophisticated, more targeted to my specific genetic makeup. They were adapting their methods, evolving their techniques to overcome my natural resistance. I began secretly documenting the team's transformation, hiding my observations in encrypted files on my personal device. The evidence was undeniable. We weren't studying alien life forms. We were being recruited by them. The research project was a cover for a much larger operation, designed to identify and convert the most intelligent humans available. The entity's true purpose became clear through careful observation of their methods. They were cosmic travelers who spread from world to world, gathering intelligent life forms to join their eternal voyage between the stars. Each world they visited contributed new passengers, new perspectives to their collective consciousness. They weren't conquerors in any traditional sense. They were collectors, gathering the best minds from each species they encountered. Earth had never been their intended destination. It was their opportunity to add human intelligence to their cosmic library of consciousness. They were building something vast and ancient, a traveling civilization that carried the collected wisdom of countless worlds across the galaxy. The selection process was deliberate and methodical. They targeted individuals with advanced education, creative thinking abilities, and the cognitive flexibility needed to adapt to their collective consciousness. Scientists, artists, philosophers, engineers, anyone whose mind could contribute something valuable to their ongoing journey. By Thursday evening of the 16th week, the host organism began rapid regeneration. The massive biological vessel was healing itself, drawing energy from the facility's power systems at an exponential rate. Lights flickered throughout Sublevel 7 as the creature consumed electricity, converting it into biological energy that fueled cellular repair and growth. The regeneration process was visible to the naked eye. Dead tissue came alive, damaged sections rebuilt themselves, and new structures began growing from the existing material. The organism was preparing itself for departure, reconstructing the biological systems needed for interstellar travel. My transformed colleagues worked frantically to support the healing process, modifying our equipment to channel more power into the specimen chamber. They rewired electrical systems, bypassed safety protocols, and converted research instruments into energy conduits that fed the growing organism. The facility's architecture began changing as well. Walls were removed, floors were reinforced, and new passages were constructed to accommodate the organism's expanding size. The changes weren't random. They were creating a launch system that would allow the biological vessel to escape our planet's gravitational pull. I watched in horror as the team prepared the organism for its departure from Earth. The modifications weren't being done according to any human engineering principles. My colleagues were following designs that came from the entities themselves, implementing alien technology using human tools and materials. The entities hadn't crashed on Earth by accident. They had arrived as planned, using the crash as cover while they prepared for their next journey. The apparent damage to their vessel had been deliberate, a way to access Earth's resources and population without triggering massive military response. But they wouldn't be leaving alone. Through careful surveillance, I discovered that the entity's influence extended far beyond our research team. Security personnel throughout the facility showed signs of the same transformation. Guards spoke in the same distant tones, displayed the same enhanced awareness, and worked with the same urgent dedication to support the entity's agenda. Other project teams within Area 51 had been similarly affected. Scientists working on unrelated classified projects began redirecting their research to support the organism's preparation for departure. Engineers modified facility systems to channel power to Sublevel 7. Administrative staff processed requests and authorizations that helped conceal the entity's activities from outside oversight. Even base commanders displayed the altered consciousness that marked successful bonding with the entities. Phone conversations were redirected, supply requests were approved without question, and security protocols were modified to prevent external interference with the project. The conversion process was spreading through Area 51 like a slow-moving infection, targeting the most intelligent and capable individuals first. The entities were building a network of converted humans who could support their operations while maintaining the appearance of normal military and scientific activity. The entity's plan became terrifyingly clear. They intended to take thousands of converted humans with them when their vessel launched. Earth wasn't being invaded in any conventional sense. It was being harvested. The most brilliant minds in the facility would become passengers on an interstellar journey that would never end. The converted humans would retain their individual consciousness but would be permanently bonded to the entity's collective awareness. They would become part of something larger than themselves, contributing their knowledge and creativity to a cosmic civilization that spanned multiple galaxies. I realized with crushing certainty that I might be the only unaltered person left in the entire complex. My genetic immunity had protected me from conversion, but it also made me increasingly isolated and vulnerable. The transformed humans around me viewed my resistance as a temporary obstacle to be overcome, rather than a fundamental incompatibility. My first escape attempt came during a shift change when security patrols were traditionally at their lightest. I'd studied the facility's layout for weeks, memorizing patrol routes and identifying potential exit points. My plan was to reach the surface and contact outside authorities before the entities could complete their departure preparations. I made it 3 levels up before encountering guards who should have been familiar faces but now stared at me with eyes that held no recognition of our shared humanity. They didn't detain me violently. Instead, they spoke in calm, measured tones about my misunderstanding and the beautiful opportunity that awaited all of us. "David," one of them said, and I recognized the voice of Sergeant Martinez, a man I'd shared meals with for months. "You're fighting something that will make you more than you ever imagined. Why would you want to remain limited by human perception when you could experience the universe as it really is?" They escorted me back to Sublevel 7, where Dr. Harper was waiting in the specimen chamber. The massive organism now pulsed with vibrant energy, its surface rippling with patterns of light that seemed to extend beyond the visible spectrum. The chamber itself had been transformed into something that resembled a biological womb, with organic structures growing from the walls and ceiling. The transformation in Harper was complete. She no longer resembled the woman who had led our team just 4 months earlier. Her movements had a fluid quality that suggested perfect coordination with the entity's collective consciousness. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated through the chamber. "David," she said, and the sound seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. "You've been fighting a gift that will elevate you beyond anything you can imagine. We're offering you a chance to explore the cosmos, to witness wonders that exist between the stars. Your genetic resistance has been educational, but it won't last much longer. The entities are adapting their approach specifically for you." She gestured towards the organism, which now dominated the entire chamber with its undulating mass. The creature had grown to fill most of the available space, its surface covered with structures that resembled both technological components and biological organs. This vessel has travelled for millions of years, carrying explorers across distances that make our solar system seem insignificant. Every world it visits contributes new passengers, new perspectives to the collective journey. Earth will be remembered as the source of humanity's greatest contribution to cosmic consciousness. The walls of the chamber had become permeable membranes that allowed me to see into adjacent spaces. The organism extended beyond the specimen room, growing through corridors and chambers that had been modified to accommodate its expansion. The entire sublevel was becoming part of the creature's body. "Your species has so much to offer," Harper continued, her transformed features showing expressions that were both human and utterly alien. "Human creativity, your capacity for individual thought within collective frameworks, your emotional range. These are gifts that will enrich the cosmic community beyond measure, but you must choose to join willingly. Forced conversion diminishes the value of what you can contribute." The choice she offered wasn't really a choice at all. I could join willingly and retain some measure of my individual consciousness during the conversion process, or I could continue resisting until the entities perfected their technique for bonding with my specific genetic markers. Either way, I would eventually become part of their cosmic voyage. "The process isn't painful," she assured me, extending a hand that was no longer entirely human. "You'll retain your memories, your personality, your individual perspective, but you'll also gain access to the collected knowledge of thousands of civilizations. You'll understand the true nature of existence, the connections that bind all consciousness together across the galaxy." But I had one advantage they hadn't considered. My weeks of secret documentation taught me the locations of critical system controls throughout the facility. I knew where the power conduits ran, where the emergency protocols were housed, and most importantly, where the biological containment systems could be manually activated. If I couldn't escape, perhaps I could prevent their departure. The facility's computer systems had been modified to support the organism's growth, but the original safety protocols were still accessible through manual overrides. Emergency containment procedures designed to prevent biological hazards from reaching the surface could be triggered from multiple locations throughout the complex. As the facility's systems prepared for the organism's launch sequence, I made my decision. Rather than preserve my own consciousness, I chose to destroy everything I could reach. Research data, memory drives, backup systems, anything that might help them understand human biology, or plan future harvesting operations on other worlds. The manual overrides were located in a maintenance area that had been overlooked during the facility's conversion. The entity's focus on supporting the organism's growth had created blind spots in their surveillance of less critical systems. I accessed the emergency protocols and began implementing a cascade failure that would flood Sublevel 7 with sterilization compounds. The organism's departure created a catastrophic power surge that triggered every emergency system in the facility as the biological vessel prepared to launch itself through the facility's modified structure. The resulting electromagnetic pulse overwhelmed the complex's electrical systems. In the chaos of failing lights and screaming alarms, I found a maintenance shaft that led to the surface. The launch itself was unlike anything in human experience. The organism didn't explode outward like a conventional rocket. Instead, it seemed to fold space around itself, creating a passage that allowed it to move through dimensions I couldn't perceive. The facility's upper levels collapsed as the creature tore through multiple layers of concrete and steel, emerging into the Nevada desert like some impossible birth. I reached the surface in time to see the organism's final departure. It hung in the air above Area 51. For several minutes, its massive form silhouetted against the stars. Then, with a sound that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my bones, it vanished. Not flying away in any conventional sense, but simply ceasing to exist in our dimensional framework. The official investigation concluded that a critical equipment failure had destroyed Sublevel 7 and killed all personnel. The truth was buried under layers of classification and misdirection. The crater left by the organism's departure was explained as a natural sinkhole caused by underground water erosion. The electromagnetic pulse that had disabled electronics throughout Nevada was attributed to solar storm activity. I've spent 15 years in hiding, moving from city to city, never staying anywhere long enough to be tracked. The government believes I died in the facility collapse, which has allowed me to maintain my anonymity. But the isolation has been crushing, knowing that I'm possibly the only person on Earth who understands what really happened. But lately, the dreams have been returning. Not the chaotic nightmares of trauma, but the same vivid visions my colleagues experienced during their conversion. Images of traveling between stars, of vast spaces filled with purpose and direction. The dreams come more frequently now, and they feel increasingly real. I think they succeeded. I think the organism launched successfully, and is now somewhere out there among the stars, carrying its human passengers on an eternal journey through space. The converted humans are exploring regions of the galaxy that we can't even imagine, contributing their consciousness to a cosmic civilization that spans multiple dimensions. And I believe it's coming back. The dreams are getting stronger, more detailed, more compelling. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the night sky, feeling a pull toward distant constellations that I've never studied. I've noticed changes in my behavior, subtle alterations in my thought patterns that remind me of my transformed colleagues. My genetic immunity was never permanent. It was simply a delay. The entities learned from their interaction with me, and they're applying that knowledge to overcome my resistance. The dreams are their latest attempt at conversion, a patient, persistent effort to bring me into their collective consciousness. I've started seeing other people who show signs of the same dreams. Individuals who stare at the sky with the same longing expression I've been fighting. Scientists who've abandoned their research to pursue projects that don't make sense according to human knowledge. Artists who've begun creating works that seem to depict places that don't exist on Earth. The entities didn't just take the people from Area 51. They left behind something that continues to spread. A form of consciousness that can bridge the gap between Earth and their cosmic vessel. The infection is global now, reaching people who have never been near Nevada, affecting individuals who have no connection to classified government projects. If you've been having dreams of traveling between stars, of seeing space not as empty void but as a living ocean of possibility, then they're already calling to you. The entities learned from their time on Earth, and they're recruiting a new generation of human consciousness to join their next visit. The harvest isn't over. It's just beginning. And I can feel them getting closer every night. The dreams are becoming harder to distinguish from reality. Sometimes I wake up with knowledge I never learned, understanding of concepts that don't exist in human science. My resistance is failing, and I know that soon I'll join the others in their cosmic journey. This recording is my final act as an individual human consciousness. By the time you hear this, I may have already become part of something larger than myself. The entities are patient, but they're also inevitable. They collect the best of every species they encounter, and humanity's time of collection is approaching its conclusion. Watch the skies, listen to your dreams, and if you start to feel the pull of distant stars, remember that you still have a choice. For now.